Hey, you guys, it's fund drive time again at the Institute. Help me pay my writers. The Institute is awesome. You don't need convincing by me. You just need the address, libertarianinstitute.org/donate. Check out all the great kickbacks, including our latest book, Israel, winner of the 2003 Iraq Oil War by Gary Vogler. And we've got $10,000 in matching funds, so you can double your support without even trying. And William Van Wagenen's Syria book is almost done, too. It's so good, just you wait. But it does take resources to edit and publish these books, so your help is greatly appreciated. I'm working on Provoked every day, I promise. libertarianinstitute.org/donate. And thanks, y'all.
All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the brand new Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I've recorded more than 5,500 interviews since 2003, almost all on foreign policy, and all available for you at scotthorton.org. You can sign up for the podcast feed there, and the full interview archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show.
All right, you guys, on the line again, I've got Matt Taibbi from Racket News. Welcome back to the show, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate you joining us on the show again here, and it's always so much fun to watch your podcast and read all your articles, and I'm so glad that you got new Russiagate stuff for me to include in the book before it comes out, and all kinds of cool things here to talk about. Terrible, terrible things to talk about. Let's talk first about Tulsi Gabbard and this story. First of all, it was somebody else who broke the story. I forgot the name of the website, and I'm sorry I don't have it in front of me, but can we talk about
Uncover DC? That's it's Tracy Beans' site.
Okay, and I know her from Twitter. Tracy Beans with a Z at the end there, right? And it's, what did you say the name of it was again?
Uncover DC.
Uncover DC. Okay. And the story was, and did she have this from Gabbard, or she had this from the TSA somehow had given it to her, somebody?
No, she got it from the Air Marshals National Council, which is like an association that advocates on behalf of air marshals. And I mean, it's a bit of a complex story, but basically, they have this Quiet Skies program that allows the government to follow people on airplanes with these teams of air marshals, and they've been doing this for years. And when Tulsi Gabbard's name showed up on the list, a couple of the marshals got freaked out and eventually decided to come forward and make a whistleblower complaint. And actually, as of this morning, they've kind of formally done that. They sent letters to committees in Congress, but that's the story that Uncover got first, was that there were whistleblowers who were coming forward.
Wow. Okay, so good for them. It's nice to know there are at least some patriots inside the government agency somewhere, and I guess I'm kind of resentful that they're only mad because she is literally an officer, a major in the Hawaii National Guard. So it's a federal government employee who they're being made to tread on here. But still, she's a good person. And
worse than that, she's a lieutenant colonel, actually.
Oh, lieutenant colonel. Oh, my gosh, she got promoted. So, again, because she keeps getting promoted because she's actually not a Russian agent. Is that right?
Right.
Or they're promoting her because the whole government is still under the control of Russia ever since Trump was in there the last time.
It doesn't make a lot. I mean, so many things about this don't make any sense, right? Like if she really were a domestic terror threat, like somebody you wanted to follow on an airplane because you were afraid they were going to hijack or bomb an aircraft, you would think that your first call would be to the Army to strip that person of their top secret security clearance. Right. But they didn't do that. There were no interviews, no calls on that end either.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, just like with Trump, they never sent the FBI to warn him that we think there are Kremlin spies inside your campaign. No, because they didn't really think that. That's why.
Right. This is a similar thing. It doesn't make any sense on any logical level. It's just
okay. So now, what were they doing to her?
So I mean, this program is it's kind of amazing that it hasn't gotten as much press as it should. This Quiet Skies thing has been around for years, since the early 2010s, and there was a predecessor program before that. And what happens is when somebody like Tulsi's put on a list, the air marshals basically just get a sheet of paper, and then they have to follow her, and it's 3 marshals per plane per flight. So if the person takes 3 flights in a day, you're talking about 9 marshals. If she's on a wait list for another flight, you need another 3 marshals. They had bomb-sniffing dogs assigned to Tulsi Gabbard. You can have as many as 15 people in an airport following a single person under this program. And this is not confined to former presidential candidates. They've been doing this to thousands of Americans who are not even suspected of crimes. This program has never once resulted in an arrest or even in someone being elevated to another threat list ever. So it's literally useless, but extremely expensive.
Yeah, but what did she ever do to Kamala Harris?
Well, that's true. I mean, you have to think about that. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard was instrumental in Kamala Harris's presidential campaign faltering last time, and I know from talking to Tulsi that was one of the first things that she thought about when she found out about this.
It's the appearance of impropriety, I'll tell you. It isn't exactly a one-to-one connection that we can see. It seems to be something, maybe. But then again, Harris aside, Hillary Clinton didn't specifically name her, but basically did, and everybody knew exactly what she meant. And she accused Tulsi Gabbard of being a Russian agent sent to disrupt the Democratic Party election in 2020.
Yes, she did. Called her a Russian asset. And, and a thing that I think was even as sinister is that NBC News had a gigantic expose about Tulsi being essentially a Russian front that was timed to the launch of her campaign in 2020. So they had a story come out that very day that was sourced, by the way, to Hamilton 68, among other things. So yeah, there was a coordinated effort to identify this person who has nothing to do with Russia at all, and is, a decorated war veteran. Not that should make a difference, but yeah, they've been playing this game since the last campaign at least, and now they've gone on to following people on airplanes, which is the stuff of the Stasi or some crazy Cold War era regime.
Yeah. Well, and it's too bad that it takes them doing it to her to bring this to people's attention. But it's just as wrong when they do it to her as when they do it to everybody else too. It's completely crazy. Maybe it's worse in a way where when it's so obviously political kind of persecution. It has nothing to do with even a pretension of a real suspicion over activity in this way. But
yeah, for
at least,
sure.
then again, she
Go
can
ahead.
defend herself too. So that's, the other side of that. But
Right, yeah, and there were a lot of people who are in this program who basically were just in Washington on January 6th, or they flew into Washington on the 5th and left on the 7th, or something like that. There was actually a whistleblower complaint 2 years ago from a TSA, from an air marshal who saw his own wife on the list. And
I like that one.
Yeah, that actually happened, and that person came forward. They made a disclosure. They complained to Congress. Nothing happened, but the morale is incredibly low in the Air Marshal Service because they have all these people who've been trained to do this high-level work, and they're following around like 75-year-old ladies in MAGA hats. And it's not cheap either. I mean, think about the expense of sending 3 air marshals to follow somebody around for any stretch of time. It's a significant expenditure. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year on this stuff.
Yeah. And just presuming for the sake of argument that we need these guys to provide security on planes, it'd be much better to just have one on each plane in case something happens. And by the way, Israel bombing little kids in their shelters is what caused September 11th last time around. And there's been much lower level, but still there's been kind of renewed Islamist terrorist attacks across the old world anyway, and potentially here as blowback from the current crisis. And people really should, I think, be paranoid and have their eyes peeled about real terrorist attempts. And that also means that the air marshals should be keeping regular people safe and not running political errands for corrupt masters, which is so obviously the case in this case. Or like you say, casting such a broad net, they're following people around who haven't done anything or aren't associated, looking for, going on a fishing expedition against somebody who may have been in Washington on the 6th, things like this. I mean, it's just like in Boston, they were right in the middle of entrapping a guy into a phony plot when the Boston plot, the marathon plot, went right under their nose.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is what happens when you commit, awesome amounts of government resources to stupid, missions chasing stats or where there's no chance of success whatsoever, where there's no oversight. I mean, one of the problems with this program is that, and this has to do with a lot of the war on terror stuff, because they're not intending ever to make cases. They're not trying to, develop a prosecution against somebody. None of this stuff is ever reviewed. They don't even plan on it being reviewed. So there's no probable cause. They don't have to have a reason to follow somebody. They're just following people around to do it. And as you say, if they actually had to conduct high-level investigations and pick appropriate targets, they would definitely do they would choose people who are real priorities. And I did hear from marshals this week about the sort of post-October 7th reality where we should be committing more resources in other places.
Yeah. All right. So, well, that'll be interesting to see whether this becomes more of a controversy at all. I know that she does not have a lot of juice in Washington, but she is still pretty high profile. And I mean, did this get picked up by the Post of the Times at all? I don't think I saw it.
No, but it's getting more traction now. I think because a letter went out to 8 committees last night, and I know that there's some momentum within some of those committees to actually do an investigation. The problem is there have been complaints about the TSA and about this Quiet Skies program for almost 10 years now. And Congress is just kind of afraid to go there because it's such a gigantic fix. But the marshals are basically on, they're hoping that this is a high profile enough incident to move Congress to finally take the plunge and fix the whole thing. And there's a chance that might happen. So, yeah, let's hope.
Yeah, seriously. Hey, by the way, I'm going to interview your buddy, Matt Orfalia. How do you say it right?
Or I think it's Orfalia. We just call it Orf. Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. Orfalia. Yeah. Okay. I
Could be Orfalia. I don't know.
Mispronounce things. That's great. So yeah, I'm going to talk to him today because he has this great thread on censorship here, which I'll let him tell this story, but it's about how they were censoring the disinformation and misinformation, that there's anything wrong with Joe Biden's old brain, and how they got away with that apparently. But so that's at least a segue into our topic, our next one here, which is this story by a guy writing for you, James Rushmore, here at Racket News. The FOIA files, the University of Washington, through its Center for an Informed Public, has played an outsized role in shaping anti-disinformation campaigns. So now this is the thing that lady from Grenada or something started accusing you of perjuring yourself because you mixed up one acronym or another about which acronym was a government agency or not. And of course it turned out that you were right and she didn't know what she was talking about. But this ties into that, right? And this is like more revelations about the massive and impressive censorship industrial complex, right?
Yeah, so after the Twitter files, I invested a whole bunch of money in sending FOIA letters out really to every, public university that has anything to do with the anti-disinformation complex. That's what they call it, right? It's really censorship studies is what it is. But, a lot of these universities are doing this kind of work. And there are a number of them in particular that were involved with what you were talking about, the election integrity partnership, which was the big kind of cross-platform review of posts heading into the 2020 election. It was headed by Stanford University, but it also involved the University of Washington, a company called Graphica, and some others. So we got a whole bunch of information through the University of Washington, FOIAs that we sent there. And there was a lot of really interesting stuff in there, including what I think is a really key question, which is that they may not really even have a process for determining what is and is not disinformation, even though they excessively study it and are constantly identifying things as disinformation. They don't have, even a basic process for picking that out, which is really interesting. That came out in some of these letters.
Yeah, that's great. So I had imagined that there was a giant pyramid shaped structure inside the Ministry of Truth. And then the king of Snopes was at the top and he was told everybody what was right or not. And you're telling me that's not how it works?
No. So, there are a number of different academic institutions that were involved in this effort, and it's still kind of mysterious. I mean, I asked them directly, how do you, let me back up. The reason this became public is because there was a letter from an attorney that the Election Integrity Partnership had hired to review their final report. And the attorney asks a question. He says, how do the authors of your report determine that a statement is false or disinformation or worthy of a ticket? Is there an articulable standard? And he's doing the same thing that every journalist attorney does. He says, did you check? What was your process for making sure that something, is false or something is true? You need to have one because under the law, you can be sued for negligence otherwise. And so there's this, after he sends that letter, there's correspondence back and forth between these different bodies where they're essentially saying, well, gee, who is in charge of that? And it's not clear. The University of Washington says this was done at Stanford, but then they kind of said after that, well, not really. I mean, they do some kind of post factum checking where they would get interns to look it up online, but that wasn't how they picked out the topics. So it's kind of fascinating actually, because it suggests to me that they kind of know what disinformation looks like to them before they even research the issue. And that's the really scary part.
Yeah, because of course they're complete dimwits who don't know about anything other than how to shut up other people, right? If they knew what they were talking about, they'd be doing something else.
Right, and look, it's very easy to identify. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's so easy to identify political disinformation because you know what that is. You know what sounds wrong to you if you're in a position of power, and that's I have always suspected that that's kind of how they do it. Is they just say, well, that sounds wrong, and
Right.
then they go after that.
Yeah, which makes total sense. And then in the context of all this other brilliant stuff that you wrote, like in your book, Hate Inc., about the different silos of this, that, and the other thing, you have probably worse groupthink than ever before, where the kind of what counts is, and as we've seen in practice here, there's reason to doubt some of their sincerity, but there's also reason to give the benefit of the doubt to a lot of these kooks that, of course, they believe exactly what they're supposed to believe about Russiagate and Ukrainegate and vaccines and Ukraine wars and Biden's dementia and every other thing. And so they know that anything that disagrees with the party line is crazy talk. And so what else is there to know? And so therefore, what they've actually done for these past years is enforce a bunch of crap and censor the people who were telling the truth, debunking it. Because they're stupid and because they were simple enough to believe this propaganda that was so obviously false to some of the rest of us.
Yeah, and all the incentives, push them in the direction of, predetermining, what's going to be a topic for them to call disinformation and not. A lot of the stuff that we looked at involve correspondence where they're all discussing with each other, how are we going to pick out narratives for the next election. So they're already kind of like determining ahead of time what they think is going to be, a source of disinformation in, coming elections before it even happens. So they're talking about places where there's, close elections or where the results don't match the polls, or all sorts of other things, which, as a journalist, that could equally be an indication that there's corruption or a problem, right? But they're only looking for disinformation, so it's very disturbing what they're doing.
Yeah. And then, was it the same report? My brain makes all this stuff together these days anymore. But was it the same one that was shown where they were trying to define misinformation and disinformation and couldn't even really be strict about falsity when they talked about that?
Yeah, and this is crazy too. So the Department of Homeland Security, they have a sub-agency called CISA. CISA had this thing called the MDM committee. So that's misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. Now, malinformation, they define that as basically something that is, might be factually true, but misleading or, could lead to a wrong conclusion. Disinformation, they define here on paper as false or misleading information intentionally spread for an objective. And then misinformation is the only thing that is categorically false information. So that means 2 of the 3 categories of things that they're calling, some kind of misinformation or disinformation aren't even necessarily untrue. So that could be something like, somebody takes a vaccine and dies of myocarditis. Well, that might have really happened, but it would be misleading because it would lead people to be afraid of a vaccine that they shouldn't be afraid of. And when I had a back and forth with some of these folks about this, it was clear to me that they don't really understand the distinction between false and misleading. They think it's the same thing. And in journalism, it's, there's a huge, big, bright line there, right? False is false and misleading is kind of, in the eye of the beholder. And that's why these people are so dangerous.
And look, Matt, I don't know how long ago I learned this, but when I was very young, I remember, or very young, whatever, teenager or 20s or something, defining misinformation, disinformation in my own mind, at least. I think I learned it from somewhere else. Like these words already had, definitions that people understood. Misinformation was like a common misunderstanding kind of thing that possibly was a mistake in the first place that people think but ain't right. Whereas disinformation is when somebody's deliberately lying and putting out a story about something that's not true. So now they've switched those and added new ones and done whatever they want with it.
Right, yeah, and disinformation actually comes from a Russian word. It came from a Soviet term, desinformatia, which has a very concrete connotation of it's like an operation. It's something that spies do to plant a false story to get people to believe the wrong thing. Now, what's so interesting to me is that they took that word, that very strong word, disinformation, something that's like not only untrue but maliciously spread, right? That was the idea. That's been the idea for 70, 80 years. they now are adding this new idea that maybe it's just misleading information. And the reason I think they need to do that is because, now they can include things like derogatory information about Hunter Biden, for instance, right? So that might be true, or there might be elements of that story that are true, but foreign powers might want to spread it anyway, and which is what governments have always done, right? They've always spread derogatory information about each other, but we never called it disinformation before. Now we are. And the problem with that is that now that can be a reason for something to be bounced from the internet or de-amplified.
Yeah, exactly. And exactly, because that's the disinformation itself, is essentially lying about everybody who didn't do anything. Like you were saying, Hamilton 68. Everybody I don't like is a Russian agent, and telling the media that, and the media believing them every time. Even though it was Bill Kristol's group that sponsored the thing, the guy that lied us into war with Iraq, the very same individual guy who was in charge of lying us into war. They're like, oh yeah, that guy. I bet he's telling the truth this time.
Yeah, he's a solid golden source, that guy, right?
Axis of Crystal.
The irony of this whole thing is that, and as you say, giving them the benefit of the doubt, I don't even think they're aware of it. That they know, I don't think genuinely that they see that they're actually creating disinformation or misinformation when they do a lot of this stuff. They've convinced themselves that this is a righteous objective, and that there's such a thing, for instance, as political truth, as opposed to like objective or journalistic truth. And that's why them meddling in this world is so crazy.
Yeah, seriously. Well, and speaking as one of the censored, antiwar.com got thrown in, and apparently the Libertarian Institute as well, based on my Google results, have been censored based on this smear that somehow we're representing anybody else's interest. And where did that come from? It was that little weasel, Michael Weiss, who's from the Atlantic Council that's funded by foreign powers, smearing and lying. He was proper not smearing and lying about every one of his journalistic betters and calling us Russian agents. And then Google itself, which is like the king of the internet, the 800 trillion ton gorilla of internet search, decided that, I guess Michael Weiss knows what he's talking about, so people don't get to look at antiwar.com and their results anymore. That's crazy, man.
That's so infuriating. Yeah, and the Atlantic Council was one of the four partners of this election integrity partnership. So that should tell you, another thing about how much they should be trusted. And that proper not, that was like the first story that led me personally down this trail, because I'm sure you remember that Washington Post story that was based on them in late 2016, where there was a whole story about alternative media outlets that were like in sync with Russia, and there was no evidentiary standard whatsoever. It was like somebody sitting in a room making the stuff up, and as you say, that can translate pretty quickly into really being demerited in something like the Google search engine. It will have a direct impact on your ability to make money. I mean, this was a complaint, believe it or not, the World Socialist website did a lot of research on this and did a quantitative analysis of what happened when they kind of redesigned Google after Trump's election. And a lot of alternative sites on both sides of the aisle got massively de-amplified.
Yep, exactly right. I got a whole section on that in the new book. You're heavily featured all throughout the book, but especially, of course, in the Russiagate section, and which this censorship, is a huge part of the Russiagate scandal, of course.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, well... but yeah, and as long as I'm accusing Michael Weiss, I'll go ahead and accuse him of high treason too, and all of his material support for Al Qaeda in Syria for all of those years. He's the worst traitor to America since Benedict Arnold. And I'll also cite my source, which is on the proper not thing, which is Yves Smith, if that's how you say it, from Naked Capitalism, ran sophisticated tools on the site and found where the proper night site was ultimately sourced back to
That's
his
interesting.
project.
That's how she did it. Okay, interesting.
Yep.
I didn't know that. Yeah, no, she does great work. And those proper not folks, they've been pretty dogged, even though they haven't been in the limelight since early 2017, late 2016. I heard during the Twitter files that they were still influential with a lot of people in this world. So yeah, it's a thing.
Man, it's just incredible. It's, after all this time that they still carry that weight, that they didn't have to revise after the Mueller report came out or whatever. They didn't have to revise any of that. They just left it on that they were right all along mode instead of having to ever fess up. Because, hey, the interns checked it on Google. So, by circular Google reasoning, that
Right.
proves the point,
Right, right. And look, not to be too dramatic about this, but if you look at what's going on in the UK right now, obviously, the violence there is a terrible thing, but they're moving forward with this program of arresting people on the basis of statements made online, and they're applying, an extremely subjective criterion for what's false or what's inciting, and it's moving the entire world in this direction of criminalizing misinformation, which is, I think, the ultimate end goal of a lot of this stuff. And it's a scary moment, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Hey, you guys, coming up this October 7th through the 11th, join Mikkel Thorup, host of the Expat Money podcast, the heroic Ron Paul, the great Tom Woods, Doug Casey, Mark Faber, Tom Luongo, myself, and many other great speakers for the online Expat Money Summit 2024. My presentation will be on the subject of my new book, Provoked: How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine, which is not quite out yet. And learn how you can reclaim your freedom by moving abroad, legally reduce your tax bill, and protect your assets. More than 8,000 people attended last year, and it's free. My guys Kyle Anzalone and Dave DeCamp from the Institute and antiwar.com will be joining a panel discussion as well. Just go to 2024.expatmoneysummit.com for all the info. That's 2024.expatmoneysummit.com. Well, I guess it was just a matter of time. I drank so much coffee I turned into some. Hey guys, check out the Scott Horton Show special blend at MoondosArtisanCoffee.com. It's a blend of organically grown Ethiopian and Sumatran coffee beans. Two very different coffees combined to create a unique blend. Ethiopia is smooth and medium-bodied. Sumatra, rich, heavy-bodied coffee. And it's got caffeine, lots of it, which is good for if you have to drive drunk or get up in the morning. Click through from the link in the right-hand margin at scotthorton.org to save 10% on your order. It's the Scott Horton Show blend from Moondos Artisan Coffee.
Hey guys, I had some wasps in my house, so I shot them to death with my trusty Bug Assault 3.0 model with the improved salt reservoir and bar safety. I don't have a deal with them, but the show does earn a kickback every time you get a Bug Assault or anything else you buy from Amazon.com by way of the link in the right-hand margin on the front page at scotthorton.org. So keep that in mind. And don't worry about the mess. Your wife will clean it up.
Well, folks, sad to say, they lied us into war. All of them. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq War I, Serbia, Afghanistan, Iraq War II, Libya, Syria, Yemen. All of them. But now you can get the ebook, All the War Lies, by me for free. Just sign up for the email list at the bottom of the page at scotthorton.org or go to scotthorton.org/subscribe. Get All the War Lies by me for free, and then you'll never have to believe them again. Well, Dave Smith was on the Tucker Carlson show, and at one point he started basically talking straight to Trump and was like, listen, man, run on censorship. This is the thing. They want to crush free speech. You're its last chance. Go out there and say that. Go out there and threaten Google. They better quit it. And It worked for Zuckerberg, right? If I remember this right from 3 weeks ago, and I admit I got what Joe Biden's got, so correct me if I got the story wrong here. Trump said, "Oh, that Zuckerberg, I'm putting him in prison." And then the next day, Zuckerberg unscrewed all of the censorship of Trump and his game on Twitter, his campaign and whatever else on there, and said, "You know what? On second thought, I think it's about time we give his Facebook results a fair shot."
Right. Yeah. I mean, I do remember that he was taken off, and it's still amazing that happened. I mean, that all these different platforms kind of decided based on what exactly that they were going to remove, somebody who was still the president of the United States from communicating on internet platforms.
Man.
I mean, even Bernie Sanders thought that was crazy.
I know.
The only people who think this is normal is this very narrow slice of the Democratic Party. Well, actually, that's not true. There are people in the national security world on the Republican side who, who also like these tools. They just want to use them in a different direction. But this stuff is it's designed to be applied against the general population in protection of a relatively small group of people, and that's what's so scary about it.
Yeah, seriously. All right. So last topic here, new Mueller report stuff, and this is way in the weeds, but I like it and I need to understand it as good as I can. It's really, really complicated stuff. It goes to the sourcing for the FBI attribution of the hack of the DNC and the Podesta emails to Russia, and how it wasn't just CrowdStrike. It was other people that we already know about, but we didn't know were involved in this. Is that right?
Yeah. So if you remember, when there was the Durham investigation, and then it came out that remember that crazy story about Trump and Alpha Capital, or the Alpha Bank, communicating by virtue of some crazy server. This was a story. This was one of the few Russiagate stories that came out before the election. It came out in Slate.com, and then it had a resurgence after he got elected as well. The Clinton campaign went to the authorities to try to get them to investigate this whole thing, and then it turned out, there was a lot of evidence that the story was basically sourced to these researchers at Georgia Tech, who were doing work, who were also on a contract for DARPA, which is it's a Pentagon research agency, that it's famously responsible for all sorts of exotic military inventions, but also the internet, right? Like they're a sort of high tech agency. Anyway, we've been told forever that it was CrowdStrike. It was this private company, CrowdStrike, that identified Russia as being responsible for the hack of the DNC in 2016. But we turned up emails from FOIA results that suggest that it was actually these Georgia Tech researchers and DARPA played some kind of role in the attribution as well, and may not have been entirely forthcoming about that to Congress, which is interesting.
Yeah, that was my question. This isn't in any of those transcripts, because I read a bunch of them and I don't remember this part, but it was not in there, huh?
No, and again, DARPA, so there were a couple of senators took an interest in this whole thing afterwards, one of them being Chuck Grassley of Iowa, and sort of wrote to the Pentagon and said, "Hey, what's going on? Were you guys behind, this whole hack and attribution?" And they sent him a letter back saying, "No, we did a retrospective analysis. We were, we didn't have any, we didn't fund any of that research, blah, blah, blah." And then it turns out that, we got these emails from a person in the National Security Division to the Georgia Tech folks, saying, hey, we're particularly interested in the DC leak stuff. We'd like to get more. So that kind of suggests that, the DARPA was actually involved in this whole thing. It's very complicated. It's very weedsy, and it's not going to make a ton of sense to people who didn't follow this story a lot. But basically, we were told that story about CrowdStrike doing all the identification, and now it looks like there was a group that was sort of connected to both the Pentagon and Hillary Clinton that did the research. So that's kind of your 30,000-foot view of the whole thing.
Right. Well, yeah. So two important things there. Well, the big one being the connection to Hillary Clinton. The Georgia Tech team is not DARPA. Now, I don't know. I guess they're also DARPA contractors, but then they were hired by Perkins Coie, correct?
Right. Yeah. Or Perkins Coie sort of liaised with them through somebody else and took their research to, to the FBI, and also shopped around that Alpha Capital story.
But didn't hire them.
Behalf.
You're saying the Clinton campaign didn't hire them to find this stuff in the first place? That they, or what?
Well, the hiring part of it is kind of, that's a little mysterious to me. They had this connection to this research through a company called Newstar and this guy Rodney Jaffe, and all that is complicated. But here's what you need to know is that the Georgia Tech team had a very strong connection to Perkins Coie, to the lawyers who worked for the Clinton campaign, and that the Clinton campaign was using their research and going around the Hill to try to drum up investigations based on it.
Yeah. And this is huge because this is the other huge part is these stories are completely bogus. And it's not just the Alpha Bank, which, as you said there, the story's completely nuts that Trump had a secret server secretly communicating with this Russian bank. And this is how he was getting all of his secret Manchurian candidate spy orders to overthrow the American Republic and finally a sneaky coup d'etat was through the secret server. That's the key. Everybody understands that was how they did it, was through the secret server. For the people who believed, it was huge. And it was total crap. But then also was the Yada phones and the just whatever other web traffic, I think, are distinct stories, if I kind of have it right. These were all pushed by this same Georgia Tech team, and none of them held up. And then you're telling me these same people are involved in the attribution of the hack as well.
Yeah, so this story, again, it came out in Slate. The headline for it was a Trump server communicating with Russia? And it was the author was a guy named Franklin Foer. And it's one of those stories that's so dumb that even critiquing it makes you look stupid, right? Because it sounds conspiratorial to even talk about it, but they published this stuff. A lot of people ran with this story, and the essence of it was like beyond silly. The whole idea was that there was these two servers were somehow speaking in some kind of beeping secret computer language and communicating spy codes to each other. Why they couldn't just pick up on the phone and talk, it's not clear, or meet, or whatever it was, if they were actually having some kind of conversation. But this got out there, and it was essentially a spoofed story, right? Like somebody conned a bunch of reporters into saying, "Oh my God, this computer research demonstrates that there's traffic back and forth between Trump and this Russian bank. In fact, it's really easy to generate something that looks like that, right?" And the same researchers who produced the raw materials for that seem to have had a hand in producing the attribution for that said that the Democratic Party, DNC, was hacked by Russia. And that is deeply disturbing, right? You can't have somebody who is involved in a ridiculous journalistic hoax being responsible for essentially the kickoff of Russiagate, right? So it's a crazy story. The frustrating part about this is that we get it in little bits and pieces. There are these emails, and it's like 1 inch at a time. You move it forward, but this communication between one of the Mueller investigators and these folks at Georgia Tech asking about the hack is significant evidence that it's on the right track, right? That we're onto something here, and that's just really crazy. Like so many things involved with Russiagate, it just sounds too silly to be true, but it is. It looks like.
Yeah. Well, and this is what's so great about it, right? Is if you doubt the story, you're the kook, because what are you saying? That the CIA and the FBI Counterintelligence Division and the Department of Justice and the former director of the FBI and the leaders of the Democratic Party and the Hillary Clinton campaign and all their friends in the media all conspired for 3 straight years to push a giant lie? That's crazy, Matt. How could you think such a thing?
Well, right. I mean, I remember I had a group phone call, believe it or not, between me and a bunch of other reporters who had worked in Russia after one of the early Russiagate stories broke, and we were all kind of talking to each other about, well, could this be true? And our conclusion right away was, this is either the biggest intelligence story of all time. In other words, that Putin had successfully planted a Manchurian candidate in the White House, or it's the biggest, hoax of all time, by like a factor of 1,000,000, and there's no in between it. It has to be one of those two things, which meant that, as journalists, it was going to be a very difficult thing to deal with either way, right? I mean, convincing your audience that it's not true is going to be just as hard as convincing them that it is true. So, it's nuts.
Yeah. And just like always, there's no accountability whatsoever. I mean, just like we were joking about with Crystal there, but the same with all of them. These are all the same kooks who were all wrong about Iraq and Libya and Syria before they had a chance to be bad on Russiagate and then Ukraine war and the rest.
Yeah, right. No, there's no accountability. That's all kind of past now. I mean, I think the only thing you could maybe theoretically hope for, but that it would only come in conjunction with Trump being elected, is that there would be some kind of retrospective investigation of, say, the spying on the Trump campaign in 2016, or the faking of the intelligence community assessment, or this stuff, right? Like faking the hack. I mean, but it would be so hard to even figure out how to prosecute that, because it's not on the books. There's nothing on the books that says make up a gigantic lie and move the entire enforcement apparatus in that direction for 3 years. I mean, how would you prosecute that? It's just so crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and you could tell in the Durham report, which I recommend everybody read. I mean, it's a government report, but it's a fascinating story. It's the investigation into the investigation and how it all started. And he comes up against solid granite walls over and over again. When it comes to accountability for Comey or any of his chiefs, he's not even allowed to talk to them,
Right. Yeah. And hoping to get the national media involved with it is equally equally a hopeless task, because they're never going to go there. They've already declared them. They actually have as much to lose as the guilty parties in the stories. So they're not going to walk this stuff back either, unless there's like a total overthrow of all 3 networks. So it's an unprecedented kind of story.
Yeah. I can't get over the Ray McGovern counterfactual here. From very early on in the thing, he recognized he's a former CIA Soviet analyst, as you know, I'm sure.
Yep.
And
texting yesterday with him. Yep.
Oh, there you go. And he had said that, look, the solution to this, obviously, since the investigation is the persecution here, what he should do is he should do a massive Saturday night massacre and fire everyone at the top of Justice, FBI, and the Mueller investigation. All of them are completely fired. But in the same speech where he announces that, He announced that he's declassifying everything that FBI, Justice, CIA, and NSA have on him and his team. Everything. And he wants it all delivered in triplicate in U-Haul trucks over to the Washington Post, the New York Times, National Public Radio, and the Wall Street Journal. And then do your worst, you sons of bitches, and just see what they can find, because he already knows there's nothing in there. As we talked about before, it's in the Bob Woodward book. He had instructed his lawyer, Dowd, to give Mueller everything. Don't fight him on anything. I don't give a damn. And they did. They gave him, literally, they drove a rented truck full of documents over there with everything, because Trump knew he was innocent, because the whole thing was stupid. And so he should have just went with that. But he didn't. He let them just completely pummel the crap out of him for the first 2 years of his presidency with this thing. And I know it would have been a huge controversy, but then if he'd just given all the documents to the New York Times, they could hardly cry about that, you know? And to Congress, you know?
They would have, I mean, they would have found some way to make something horrible out of it. But for sure, yeah, he should have done that. I mean, frankly, when the first day that the intel chiefs came to him with the Steele dossier stuff and, tried to tell him that he was going to be blackmailed by Putin, he should have fired all of those guys. I mean, he wasn't even in office yet, unfortunately. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that would have been the move. And I think Ray's definitely right there. Yeah.
And especially, like, it would be fitting with his character, too, that, like, I'm not going to let you do this to me. But he didn't know what to do. And he didn't have good advice. They ran that. Bannon was the only one who, like, cared about him, I guess. I don't know if that's even true. The only one who gave him any kind of real advice from his own point of view anyway, maybe, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and they got rid of him quick.
Yeah, the only people who in his circle who had any experience with this kind of thing were Flynn and maybe Bannon, right? Bannon just had the correct instinct, I think, in terms of this stuff. But yeah, knowing how to deal with these kinds of creatures in Washington, I think it's an art. You have to be like a certain kind of crocodile to know how to swim with these folks, and he didn't. That was a major flaw of his presidency, I think.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it. I remember thinking, there would be just an incredible piece by Aaron Maté in The Nation magazine. I'm paraphrasing, titled Trump Acquitted. This is a bunch of crap by Aaron Maté. And then it would have just, this is not true. None of it is true. Look, everybody, line by line by line by line by line. Can't you see? They're just framing him. And Trump couldn't make the most of that. His staff couldn't tell him that. Hope Hicks or whoever could not tell him, look, boss, the Liberal magazine says it's not true. Tweet that out. Make the hay out of that. That, like, look, even The Nation delved into this and showed that it's not true. He could have made major hay out of that. It didn't even occur to him or a single person who worked for him, apparently. And he blew opportunities like that over and over again, Yeah,
and it seemed that he was afraid of the intelligence services, which he probably should be. But the problem is, I'm not sure that he's past that fear of them. So, that's a concern if he gets elected again. He's got to get over that and find a way to counter these kinds of things.
Yeah. All right. I'm sorry I kept you over time. Can I ask you one more thing real quick?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Are you having fun with this Kamala Harris craziness or what, man?
I think it's an amazing story. I mean, the really amazing story, I think, with Kamala is the complete acceptance of Democratic Party voters with a process that didn't involve them at all. There's so many different things that happen now in America where they just kind of float by without comment by, the entire national media complex. We had a completely crooked primary season where, we had primaries in places like Florida and, North Carolina, where there was no choice at all. Massachusetts, New Hampshire had a real election replaced by a fake nominating event. And then when the candidate gets to the point of where he's going to be nominated, they just suddenly decide, no, we're going to get rid of him and put in this other person who unilaterally declares on television that she's the new nominee. Like, how? Don't we need to go to convention first? I mean, this stuff is all crazy. They're not even telling us what the process is. And even weirder than that, there are no questions about it. So I don't know. It's and then of course there's humor just in her whole attitude toward everything anyway. But yeah, for me, it's that whole thing. It's the way that we just bypass voters and nobody cares.
Yeah, man. And like seeing people at the crowds, I don't watch much TV, but I've seen some clips on the internet stuff of people out there supporting her. And it's like, yeah, they're going for it. Just like, oh, I guess we're blaming Saddam Hussein for 9/11 now. Okay, I don't know if you say so. They just go from Biden. There's nothing wrong with Biden at all. And she's leading the chorus on that, by the way, telling me, nah, I'm with this guy all the time. He's perfectly fine. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, yeah, no, he's too insane to run. Obviously, he can't win because nobody believes in his leadership. So then they give it to her when everybody already knows about her. That she knows nothing about anything. And then they just pretend, just like they just finished doing with Biden. No, she's great. Everybody loves her. And they're not even bothering with Sharpest attack. I guess they don't have to bother. Nobody cares if can you imagine her sitting at the Oval Office at the giant desk, actually being the one in the chair making the call on what we should do? I guess she's just going to keep Blinken and Sullivan and it'll just be more of the same. But I don't know.
Well, at least we would have we would know whom to blame for things that go wrong. I mean, right now we don't know who the president of the United States is. I mean,
I know
the country has no idea. It's clearly not Joe Biden. If the missiles fly, who's going to make the decision with the nuclear football? This stuff is we're in this weird uncharted territory. And as for her crowds, I get the fact that there are people out there who hate Donald Trump and will cheer for anybody who's his opposition. That part makes absolute sense to me. It's the stuff where, 2 days ago, we had to believe that Biden was the candidate because, Kamala was so guaranteed to lose because she was so demonstrably a bad candidate in 2020. So we're going to all claim that Biden is totally healthy. And then 24 hours later, saying the exact opposite. People make that psychological switch just effortlessly now. And I just don't know how they do it.
I know. It is embarrassing. And I agree with you that I've always sympathized with any liberals who reject the right and vice versa too. I could see the problems with the other side that makes you choose the side that you choose. That's fair enough. But to believe in Kamala Harris? And come on, man. And I'm not being sexist and racist about it. There could be a woman of any whatever who could do the job, but not even the evil job of Empress of the world. Fine. But she can't, I could see her maybe running a JCPenney's or a grocery store or something like that, but. Well,
she certainly really struggled as a national candidate in 2020. I mean, I saw her on the stump a bunch of times. I'm not going to lie and say it was 10, but I probably saw her 4 or 5 times. And, it was like the moon to her, campaigning to crowds that she wasn't used to. She seems to have gotten a little bit better at it on TV, but the fact that she's not answering questions or doing press conferences tells you that they don't really know what she stands for. And that was a big part of her problem in 2020 was that there was no discernible message from her campaign.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I guess we'll find out, but, we'll see.
It's funny, Matt, people compare her to that show Veep, but that does sound just like a sitcom scene where they make the decision that well, I know, we'll just not answer any questions at all.
Right.
We'll just stick with that, And then that works. That's the real world we live in.
I mean, not to joke about it, but there was a book about Hillary's campaign after 2016, where there was a scene with a bunch of Hillary staffers where they were trying to come up with a slogan for her and couldn't because they didn't know what she stood for.
Right.
And they experimented with "It's her turn." Because it's her turn, and they realized that was a bad idea. I mean, like it's the stuff out of, as you say, it's like an HBO comedy, but it's now real life. So
And true, like even then they settled on we're for her when all they had to do is just make it say she's for us.
Right.
Right. Like, that's all you had to do is just pretend. It's not like we believe you anyway, but like you can at least say it's not. No, like we owe it to her. Okay, good luck.
I know. Well, that tells you a lot about where their heads are at. So,
but it does make sense to me where Biden had two really big things really hurting him. One, he's too old for this in a way that is just so vivid to even the most disconnected person, to just see him on TV, much less like political people who really do know about this stuff. But then also the horrific slaughter in Gaza for this last year, which you can credibly argue is not really her fault. It's not like she's Dick Cheney and Scooter Libby over there running things in the vice president's office like in the bad old days of W. Bush or something. She doesn't have any power to decide these things, and nobody thinks that she does, so it's not being really hung around her neck. And people, I guess, even people who are mad at the current government for it, are like giving her the benefit of the doubt that, geez, she couldn't possibly be worse than Trump on that particular issue. It's the thing that he's the worst on out of everything is Israel-Palestine. And so they're willing to not hang that around her neck and not really put her feet to the fire and force her to contradict Biden and get herself in trouble before the election and stuff. And so then what do they got? Like, apparently they don't mind that she's completely vapid. They just fill in the blank with whatever they imagine. But the two big negatives that really were hurting Biden are gone. And when it comes to the Republicans making such a big deal about how old Biden was, well, now who's the old man and who's like stumbles over his words and gets confused and whatever, even compared to her, even though she's a dummy, she's still half his age. And so it's amazing to see, but the way the stars line up, there you go. She's at 50-50. They have her ahead in some of the polls.
Yeah. And assuming those are true, I mean, it's an amazing story, and it's going to validate this idea that we don't need voters. So, I mean,
yeah, exactly. We just let the Atlantic Council decide.
Right. Yeah. Great.
Okay, great. Well, listen, man, keep doing all your great journalism. I'll keep reading it and interviewing you about it.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Scott. Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Bye.
All right, you guys, that's the great Matt Taibbi.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM. in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.